Welcome back to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic. It is Build a Deck Tuesday here at MTG Burgeoning, and in today's video we are going to continue with our second Oathbreaker build. The community has already selected its second Oathbreaker in the form of Nicol Bolas, God-Pharaoh. However, which signature spell was selected to accompany this Nicol Bolas Planeswalker in the command zone? Hello and welcome back, MTG BC. That is the MTG Burgeoning Community. This is the continuation of our second Oathbreaker deck build, and if you missed any of the previous installments in this series, well, where the heck have you been? The community is deciding it all, folks. They've selected our second Oathbreaker. They have come to a consensus to select our second signature spell, and to accompany Nicol Bolas in the command zone will be Deliver Unto Evil. For 2 and a black, we choose up to 4 target cards in our graveyard. If we control a Bolas Planeswalker, which we have to because we can only cast the spell if Nicol Bolas is on the battlefield and under our control. If we control a Bolas Planeswalker, we return all of those cards to our hand. Otherwise, blah blah blah, it doesn't matter. It says to exile Deliver Unto Evil. However, it goes right back to the command zone. So if Bolas comes down and it's still on the battlefield and we can protect it, we untap, we can cast Deliver Unto Evil, bring 4 cards to our hand for just 2 and a black. And because Bolas up there costs 7 mana, if we make our mana drop and have an 8th mana to use it, we can cast it a second time on that same turn for 4 more cards. That's 8 total mana for 8 cards straight from our graveyard right to our hand. The MTG Burgeoning Community did a good job selecting these 2 cards, and now we're going to start laying down the framework for this Oathbreaker deck. We have a 58 card deck to construct around Nicol Bolas and Deliver Unto Evil, and for today's video we are going to put together our creatures. So here we go, MTG BC. Creature 1, Nightscape Familiar. 1 and a black. It's a 1/1 zombie and says blue and red spells we play cost 1 less to play. And if we slowly bring the Nightscape Familiar down, that's right, Nicol Bolas is up there, and it is a blue and a red spell. So in order to get Bolas onto the battlefield a bit more quickly than just playing 1 land or 1 mana rock, we can reduce that cost and get him into play a lot sooner. For the purposes of protection, both for Bolas and our own life total, we can also tap 1 and a black, regenerate Nightscape Familiar, and chump block for days. Creature number 1, Nightscape Familiar. Next up we have Augur of Bolas. 1 and a blue for a 1/3 Merfolk Wizard. When it ETBs, we look at the top 3 cards of our library. We may reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them and put it into our hand. We put the rest on the bottom of our library in any order. As this is going to be a classic Grixis control deck, we are going to have a pretty close 50-50 split with creatures and important instant and sorcery spells. So including something that can help dig through the top 3 cards of our library to find an integral sorcery or instant at the time that we need it. 1 copy of Augur of Bolas seems like a good place to go. Next creature, we have Dreadhorde Butcher. black and a red for a 1/1 zombie warrior with haste. And when it deals combat damage to a player or a planeswalker, put a +1/+1 counter on Dreadhorde Butcher. When Dreadhorde Butcher dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. This is a fantastic creature to get in the early game. If we're fortunate enough to drop this on turn 2, swing in at a player, most likely not a planeswalker on turn 2, but we start to get the +1/+1 counters built up on Dreadhorde Butcher, keep attacking our opponents, maybe hitting a couple of planeswalkers. This starts to get pretty big, and remember, in the Oathbreaker format, life totals are only 20. So if we can get 3 to 4 +1/+1 counters on Dreadhorde Butcher before he starts to become a real problem and potential for, a potential target for removal, we're looking at a 25% life reduction for one of our opponents if this is sent to the graveyard. So hopefully we can get Dreadhorde Butcher out there in the early game, but it's not terrible in the late game either. Next card, next creature, 1 copy of Vampire Hexmage, double black for a 2/1 Vampire Shaman with first strike. We can sacrifice Vampire Hexmage to remove all counters from target permanent. Since this is Oathbreaker, our opponents are also going to have Planeswalkers in the command zone, Planeswalkers in their library, maybe Planeswalkers in their hand, Planeswalkers on the battlefield. Well, by sacrificing Vampire Hexmage, we can remove all counters from one of those Planeswalkers and send it straight to the graveyard or straight back to the command zone. And all that costs to do is just sacrificing a creature that costs 2 black to cast. Vampire Hexmage is going to do a lot of heavy lifting in this Oathbreaker deck. Next creature we have is going to be a copy of Plaguecrafter, 2 and a black. Not sure what that was. Well, I mean, I know what that was, but just to edit that out of your mind for the moment. Plaguecrafter is 2 and a black. It's a human shaman 3/2, and when it ETBs, each player sacrifices a creature or planeswalker. Each player who can't discards a card. So for the purposes of our deck, Plaguecrafter comes down, and more than likely, we are sacrificing Plaguecrafter. What our opponents do is they're going to sacrifice a creature. Maybe they're going to sacrifice their own Oathbreaker. And if they don't have a creature or a planeswalker, guess what? Their resources are going to become a little more restricted by being forced to discard a card. Plaguecrafter, awesome. All right, next inclusion, 1 copy of Opposition Agent. 2 and a green with a 3/2 human rogue with flash. We control our opponents while they're searching their libraries. While an opponent is searching their library, they exile each card they find. We may play those cards for as long as they remain exiled, and we may spend mana as though it were any color to cast them. Everyone knows the power and the virtues extolled by Opposition Agent ever since it was first spoiled during the Commander Legends preview season. It's going to be a wonderful addition to this Grixis deck. All right, if we're going to include Opposition Agent, it only makes sense that we include its blue counterpart from the same set. And you know where we're going with this, folks. 1 copy of Hull Breacher. 2 and a blue, 3/2 Merfolk Pirate with flash. If an opponent would draw a card, except for the first one they draw on each of their draw steps, instead, we get to create a treasure token. So again, that helps with ramp if we can get it out early enough. If our opponents are greedily trying to draw more than 1 card per turn, which, let's be honest, it's going to happen. We can create some treasure tokens and hopefully get Nicol Bolas out there much earlier than the 7 mana value would indicate. All right, next creature going in is a copy of Thief of Sanity. 1 blue and a black, 2/2 Flying Spectre. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, we look at the top 3 cards of that player's library, exile 1 of them face down, and put the rest into their graveyard. For as long as that card remains exiled, we may look at it, we may cast it, and we may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast that spell. Early game, this could really swing the entire balance of the game in our favor. The evasion is fantastic. It can come down on turn 3, maybe on turn 2 if we're lucky with our draw. Trying to get in for some attacks, get some choice cards out of the top of their library, 1 exile that we can cast. Thief of Sanity is going to do a lot of heavy lifting in this Grixis Oathbreaker deck. Next creature card, 1 copy of Spark Double. 3 and a blue, it's an illusion. We may have Spark Double enter the battlefield as a copy of a creature or planeswalker we control, except it enters with an additional +1/+1 counter on it if it's a creature. It enters with an additional loyalty counter on it if it's a planeswalker. And it isn't legendary if that permanent is legendary. This may be the greatest clone in the history of Magic. Can you imagine we cast Nicol Bolas, we still have it in play during our next turn, and then we Spark Double Nicol Bolas? I can't imagine many scenarios where we end up losing a grip on that game. 1 copy, Spark Double. Next creature to go in is Hostage Taker. 2 blue and a black for a 2/3 human pirate. When it ETBs, we exile target artifact or creature until Hostage Taker leaves the battlefield. We may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and we may spend mana as though it were mana of any color, or mana of any type to cast that spell. So we're having a trend here with cards such as, let's see here, cards like Thief of Sanity, cards that are allowing us to cast spells off of our opponent's library and using mana of any color to do so. So we're going to borrow some resources from our opponents and keep those nice spells clutched in our hand to be used later in the game. Next creature to include, one copy of Nicol Bolas the Ravager. One in each of our Grixis colors for a 4/4 flying dragon. Of course it's a dragon, it's Nicol Bolas. When it ETBs, each opponent discards a card. We can tap 4, a blue, a black, and a red, which coincidentally is the casting cost of our Oathbreaker. And then we can exile Nicol Bolas the Ravager and then return him to the battlefield transformed under our control. We can only do this anytime we cast a sorcery, but when we do, we get Nicol Bolas the Risen. +2 to draw 2 cards, -3, and it deals 10 damage to target creature or planeswalker. -4, we can put a target creature or planeswalker card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control. And if we are fortunate enough to click the big bang of -12, we exile all but the bottom card of target player's library. Starting off with a very healthy CMC of 7, it is not out of the realm of possibility that we can achieve Nicol Bolas's big bang ability. All right, we are nearing the bottom. We're down to our last 4 inclusions in this part of our deck building process, and the next creature is going to be Massacre Girl. 3 double black for a 4/4 human assassin with menace. Massacre Girl reads, when it ETBs, each other creature gets -1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever a creature dies this turn, each creature other than Massacre Girl gets -1/-1 until end of turn. As long as there are a couple of mana dorks out there that are 1/1 or 0/1 or ?1, Massacre Girl is going to come down and most likely going to wipe out the entire board. Of course, she will remain. Of course she should. She's Massacre Girl. Okay, next creature is Croesus the Purger. 3 and 1 each of our Grixis colors for a 6/6 flying dragon. Whenever Croesus the Purger deals combat damage to a player, we may pay 2 and a black. If we do, we choose a color, then that player reveals their hand and discards all cards of that color. It is the Oathbreaker format, and it's not always likely that everyone's going to play with a monocolored deck. So there may be instances in which we whiff by activating Croesus's ability. However, that's not a bad thing, knowing what's in our opponent's hands. To just pay 2 and a black for information, that's never a bad thing, particularly when we're playing in a multiplayer format. All right, we're down to our last 2 creatures. The next one is Etali Primal Storm. 4 and 2 red, it's a 6/6 Elder Dinosaur that reads, whenever it attacks, exile the top card of each player's library. We may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. So unlike some of the previous creatures in this deck, we don't have to worry about casting its spell and using our mana as any color to cast it. Etali just lets us cast those cards for free. And the last creature we're going to add is the big bad voodoo daddy himself, Massacre Worm. 3 and triple black for a 6/5 worm. When it ETBs, creatures our opponent's control get -2/-2 until the end of turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, that player loses 2 life. As we mentioned earlier in this video, Oathbreaker is a format that starts players' life totals at 20. So if a few creatures are going to hit the graveyard once Massacre Worm is cast, they're going to lose a great percentage of their life total, and we're left with a 6/5 monster on the battlefield. Massacre Worm, win condition, board wipe. And that is it, folks. Fans of MTG Burgeoning, fans of Oathbreaker, these are the creatures we are including in this Oathbreaker deck number 2. Nicol Bolas is our Oathbreaker. Deliver Unto Evil is our signature spell. When we come back, when we continue with this series, we will install the rest of the deck. We will install the mana base as well as our non-creature spells. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.